and it's going to be notes on questions of judging priority and authenticity, that is, among paintings. If you have two paintings, how do you judge which one is the earlier and the more likely to be from the real hand of the artist? And so on. It's a rather complicated matter, which I'll spend quite a bit of time on. Well, I'm going to use examples from the previous lectures, which are familiar to you somewhat, but saying more about them, but also bring in some others in the second half of this, which come from later periods, which illustrate my points better. I think these are extremely important matters, and this will kind of tie up the whole series in a way. A lot of it will be controversial in that not everybody agrees with this, but I think it's important nonetheless. Okay, we begin, first slides please, with the two details from the two versions of the Nymph of the Law River. The two divine figures, goddesses, floating up in the air. You will remember, if some of you will anyway, that when I discussed these, I pointed out the difference between the drawing of them and how in what I take to be the earlier version, the Liaoning version, on the left, the figures are drawn so that the volume of the figures and the space between them can be read, and the ribbons that flutter around them go around them and define their three-dimensionality and so on. You remember all that. Whereas in the Beijing version, the copyist, as I take it to be, flattens them, and the figures have no volume, and their ribbons don't work that way, and so on. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Next, please. Now, then I went on to talk about boats, as you remember. Again, the Liaoning version, which I take to be the earliest and best, is relatively readable. Features such as this kind of ladder-like thing built on the deck, which the boatmen push against as they pull the boat, or the way the ribbons in the upstairs hanging from the balcony, from the canopy, blow effectively and believably in the real one, and hang down straight and are misunderstood in the copy, in the Beijing version, which is on the right now. And then there was still a third version in the Freer Gallery, which all these, what seemed to me to be wrong matters, go further wrong. And I took it to be a copy of the Beijing version. So if that's true, then we have three versions, so three in chronological order. All right, that was relatively simple, if I'm right. Anyway, now then another pairing that I used in the lectures, less easy in this case, is the two pictures, two versions of the painting attributed to Zhou Wanju of the 10th century, titled The Double Screen. And you remember this was supposed to be the emperor of the time of the Southern Tang, Li Hozhu, and his brothers playing Wei Qi, and behind them a screen with a figure lying back, and then another screen in that. So that's why it's called Double Screen. Now, there are two versions of that. The one I discussed as the earliest and the, not the original maybe, but close to the original, is in the Freer Gallery of Art. And I told how I had kind of discovered it, had it remounted, was going to publish an article on it. But in fact, I left before I did this, and Tom Lawton published a very good piece on it in his book on Chinese figure painting. Okay, however, the Freer Gallery has recently put a new piece on its website, which is on Sungyuan paintings in the collection. It gives pictures of them and information on them and opinions on them from the Freer records. I give a reference to this in my handout. Now, in that, whoever wrote that, the Beijing version is credited as being, quote, generally deemed to be the older of the two. Well, end quote. I don't believe that. I still think the Freer version is older. And I corresponded with old friend Tom Lawton by email, and he agrees with me. And he published it, I say, in his Chinese figure painting, the Freer version, and writes this, quote, most significantly, the tremulous brush technique in which the four principal figures are executed is less mannered, suggesting that the freer version is the earlier work, end quote. Well, okay, I agree with that. In the freer version, this John B. tremulous brushwork technique for the figures, the drapery drawing of the figures, is much more convincing, early, real, whereas it's largely lost and conventionalized in the Beijing version, which is on the whole much neater, and I take it to be a copy of a later time. I would something else which is a little less obvious maybe, but if you think about the whole point of this painting, which is that it's supposed to provide a kind of deliberate ambiguity in the rendering of space, so that one's first impulse might be to read the space of the screen behind the figures as a continuation of their space, rather than a flat picture behind them. The artist plays a little trick on you, in other words. But in the freer version, I think this works quite well, as you might see. I might agree here even from these reproductions. And in the Beijing version, less well. I don't have good slides of the Beijing version, so this doesn't really work very well, and I can't make the argument very well. One minor but interesting matter here in the slide of the whole of the freer. If you see the screen within the screen, the two projecting pieces from the sides of it, one of them on the left is fairly short, whereas the one on the right is much longer and continues behind the figure lying below. I would take that to be an addition by some later owner of the painting or copyist, not copyist, excuse me, some later, well, conceivably copyist, anyway, somebody who extended it by mistake or by misjudgment to go behind the figure so that they don't match. But that, I think, is just a later mistake of somebody who tried to fix something he thought was wrong. Okay, anyway, leaving that aside. Now, the next, please. Now, here we have two pictures of flowers attributed to Mu Chi. The one on the right is the one in Japanese temple, the Soken-in sub-temple, the Daitokuji, representing a hibiscus or rose mallow. There's the Furung. And then on the other one, the one on the, on the right, I guess, and on the left, anyway, whichever, is the copy. Not actually the same flower. The copyist may have misunderstood it as a peony. At any rate, this seems to be a picture of a peony. Well, leaving that aside, the two are similar enough that one might be a kind of loose copy after the other. In any case, I discussed these, showing how the brushwork, the ink values, everything in the picture that may be a real Mu Chi is convincing as a work of this great 13th century master. At the same time, it was unacceptable to literati of the time and later who saw it as bad brushwork or things that one shouldn't do anyway. In other words, as I made the argument that Chan artists generally of that time often had to break the rules, so to speak, in order to achieve their effects, which are very important and even great effects. Okay, here is this kind of scratchy, very dark brushwork of the stalks and the puddling of the ink in the blossoms and the way the leaves are represented. All of this quite lively and believable and giving volume to the whole thing. Whereas in the other, the whole image is flattened, but it's made more acceptable for the people who admired this scroll so much. In other words, what was rejected by critics of the time for bad brushwork is exactly what makes it their bad as our good, so to speak, or at least mine. Okay, leaving that aside, that again is a big argument which I can't make at great length because I don't have the right slides anyway. But going on again now. Okay, here's another one. This pairing puts together two pictures of birds. One on the left is from the anonymous big picture titled Birds in a Thicket of Blossoming Plum and Bamboo, which I take to be a painting of the time of the Emperor Huizong, early 12th century, and possibly by the artist Liang Zhong, who was a major figure in his academy, and the best flower painter, bird and flower painter among them. And for other reasons, this painting might well be by him. At any rate, the bird here, as you see, is painted volumetrically. It's a whole body, fluffy, quite beautifully soft, and anyway, readable as an organic bird, sleeping, by the way. Now, in the other, here on the right is a album leaf attributed to Lianzhong, which appeared to the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition, signed Lianzhong, in fact, and which I take to be a copy because it's flat in a way it shouldn't be. Flat and with all the different areas of the bird painted, outlined, as if outlined, set off from each other in a way that completely destroys the roundedness, the volumetric quality, and makes it, it destroys also the kind of fuzziness, the texturing of the bird. Well, this, as I say, works, I think, marvelously well in the original, and worked less well, or doesn't work, in what I would take to be a copy. Now, going on, here is the five-colored parakeet from the scroll attributed to, or I think really by, the Emperor Huizong in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Now, you see here, the bird is indeed flat, and indeed the different areas of the bird are colored neatly, and markings are indicated, and so on, all in a way that flattens the bird. So, does that mean that this is a later copy? No, I think I'm trying to say that our judgments and our criteria for judgment have to be conditioned by different factors that come into the picture, and we have to take all these into consideration. I think that the emperor doing a bird like this might very well have painted it this way to get it ornithologically right, so to speak, and because he wasn't really capable of doing the other kind of bird. Whereas in a painting attributed to a great academy master like Lianzhong, if you have that kind of flattening and so forth, it doesn't really so it doesn't really work as a coherent organic bird. Then there's something wrong. It shouldn't be a real Lianzhong. Okay, enough for that one. Now then, this is really lots of fun. I love this kind of comparisons. Okay, now here's a painting I'm very fond of, attributed to Xiaogui. There's no signature, but in the upper left is a piece of writing by a late Ming connoisseur, collector, major calligrapher named Wang Duo, and he calls it a Xiaogui painting. I think he's right. I reproduced it, although we couldn't have it in the exhibition, in the Possessing the Past exhibition, and discussed it there. Well, this, as you see, it's it may be an early work of Xiaogui, still with a lot of the Li Tong style in it. This axe-cut texture strokes, giving texture to the forms, and the strong light and shadow, and rounded volumetric forms, and so on. Okay, then there are two copies of it that I know. Now here's one later copy. This one's attributed to, it's attributed to an artist named Gao Kaming of the early Song. It doesn't matter. At any rate, now you see, I want to point out, in other words, what typically goes wrong in a copy, and certainly has gone wrong here. The artist, first of all, has flattened the forms, and these readable textured surfaces that you have in the original, and the volumetric masses, the sense of space, all of that is pretty much gone. The forms are flattened. The two large pointed projections at the sides of the main mountain mass are enlarged and kind of bizarre. And importantly, the signs of human habitation, that is the temple in the middle left, the covered bridge below, the thatched houses, is an inn actually down in a bamboo grove in the bottom. All those are enlarged and shown more prominently. That is to say, the artist wants to feature them, and the subtlety of the Xiaogui picture, in which they're more hidden, has been lost. Okay, here is still another copy. The next, please. Yes, this one's attributed to still another artist, Xiao Zhao, who was a follower of Li Tong. At any rate,